When Senator J.D. Vance demanded Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett leave in the middle of a hearing, he thought she'd obey. He was wrong. Instead, she dismantled him with quiet precision, live on national television. The room was packed, yet almost no one noticed. That's how these hearings usually went. Polished speeches, staged glances, predictable back and forth along party lines. The Senate Oversight hearing on government accountability had been dragging on for nearly 3 hours. Half the room was sneaking looks at their phones, the other half going through motions. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't performing. She sat upright, eyes locked on the front. Her binder was open, corners tabbed in color-coded precision. Every note she made wasn't for show. She read them. She understood them. And she didn't need to shout to make people pay attention. Across from her, Senator J.D. Vance slouched in his leather chair, eyes narrowing the moment she mentioned a recent grant audit tied to a former donor of his. He hadn't addressed her directly all morning. Now, his pen tapped harder, subtle, deliberate, as she spoke. She wasn't aggressive, just precise. And that made it sting. "While we've seen some improvements in transparency," she said, flipping a page, "we still haven't received full disclosure on private security contracts awarded between March and June." "That's enough," Vance interrupted sharp. Heads turned. "I'm sorry," Jasmine asked calmly. "You're out of order," he said, pushing his mic closer. "This line of questioning exceeds your allotted time and violates subsection." He glanced at a printed rulebook, pretending to read something he hadn't touched all morning. Section B, Clause 2. "I'm asking you to remove yourself from this hearing." A cough, a murmur, whispers passing between staffers. Some aides glanced at each other, wondering if he'd made it up. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't move. She let the silence stretch, long enough to feel uncomfortable. "Senator," she said slowly, "you're asking me to leave because I asked about contracts that should have been public 6 months ago?" "I'm enforcing procedure," he said, louder now, as if volume made rules real. "You're in violation of Senate protocol." The chairwoman hesitated. Cameras blinked red. Everyone watching at home thought it might be routine, but something in Jasmine's stillness said otherwise. Her aide, Curtis from Fresno, passed her a post-it without eye contact. She didn't even look. She already knew what it said. She had been waiting for a moment like this since her first month on the Hill. Underestimated, interrupted, sidelined. Labeled too direct, too sharp, too black. She had learned to keep the fire low. Now Vance had handed her the match. But before striking, she needed the room to feel the absurdity. She stayed silent for 46 seconds, enough for pens to stop moving, cameras to zoom, whispers to explode on Twitter. What just happened? She flipped to a tabbed section in her binder, took a measured breath, and smiled slightly. What she was about to say wouldn't just respond to Vance. It would change how people saw her. The silence wasn't polite. It wasn't professional. It was personal. Vance didn't speak. He leaned back, arms crossed, jaw tight, miscalculating completely. Jasmine Crockett wasn't going anywhere. She adjusted the microphone gently, the soft static breaking the quiet. The chairwoman hesitated. Nobody intervened. Not yet. Jasmine noticed. Vance wasn't doubling down. He was waiting, hoping she'd lose her temper, hoping she'd slip, give him something to use later. But she had seen this play before. She stayed quiet. 46 seconds. An eternity in a room full of political egos. Cameras fixed. One reporter tweeted before she even spoke. Jasmine Crockett challenges decorum without saying a word. Vance shifted slightly, maybe sensing his move backfired. Maybe realizing silence could speak louder than any outburst. Finally, she spoke. Not loudly, not sharp, perfectly. Calm, intimate, steady on him. "I'm surprised you'd invoke Clause 2. It hasn't been applied in over a decade, and only once against a committee member in an open hearing. Her voice didn't rise. She reminded him of something he already knew. Flipping to the correct section, she continued, the accusation that a member slandered a witness, something she hadn't done. Nor had she exceeded the scope of questioning. If this is about discomfort, she said, holding his gaze, that is not grounds for removal. A snort leaked from the back. Tension cracked. Vance forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Congresswoman, this committee has rules. You're speaking out of order, he said. I'm speaking on public record, she cut in. Polite. Measured. Firm. If the senator has any documentation proving my inquiry is out of bounds, I'll gladly yield. She pushed the binder forward. Would you like to cite it? He didn't answer. He looked to the chairwoman. But she wasn't saving him this time. She leaned forward, hesitant, unwilling to back Vance without proof. Then Jasmine closed the distance. Not physically, verbally. She leaned just slightly closer to the mic, voice dropping. Is that the transparency you campaigned on, Senator? Soft, intimate, requiring listeners to lean in. A silence followed. No shouting, no accusation. Just the weight of the question. The room froze. That single line landed like a dropped book in a silent library. C-SPAN captured it. Every reporter in the chamber noticed. Within seconds, clips were circulating online. A perfect 280-character quote, dense with meaning. Vance blinked once. Mouth opened, then closed. She didn't smile, didn't look smug. She simply turned a page in her binder, as if nothing happened, as if they were back on track. The hearing technically continued. Voices filled the space. Topics returned. But the dynamic had shifted. Jasmine hadn't just defended her seat. She reminded everyone why she belonged there. Outside, the world was already reacting, faster than anyone expected. By the time the next senator began speaking, Jasmine had withdrawn. Not physically, but mentally. Composed face, focused eyes, hands resting on her binder. Inside, she was elsewhere. 3 years earlier, at a subcommittee hearing on federal prison reform. New, nervous, learning when to speak, when to wait. Back then, preparation alone seemed enough. She had spoken on discrepancies in inmate healthcare contracts, with paperwork to prove it. A senior member cut her off, loud mocking. Suggested her passion belonged in activism, not policy. Laughter erupted, some awkward, some real. She didn't know the rules well enough to fight back. That day, she packed her notes quietly and left, pretending another meeting. Then she went back to her office. And she studied every clause, every precedent used to silence women, especially black women. Parliamentary tricks, procedural traps. Obsessed. Not in anger. Necessity. She knew it would happen again. And next time, she'd be ready. Now, here she was. Vance didn't know what she brought today. Thought it was performance. A show. But Jasmine Crockett didn't perform. She remembered. She documented. Her gaze fell on a tab labeled 2021 Hearing Committee Challenge. Yellowed, creased from overuse. Buried in procedural minutes. Most ignored it. She hadn't. Studied it. Memorized it. Waited. In 2021, a House member had been silenced under the exact clause Vance just invoked. The chair had overturned it within the hour, citing free speech within bounds of inquiry, oversight, and public funds. She knew every line, not ambition, but defense. Curtis, her aide, recognized the look on her face. Not satisfaction, calculation. Check Twitter, she murmured silently. Curtis tapped the app. Eyebrows rose. Already trending. She didn't smile. Didn't feel anything, yet. Exhaled slowly, deliberately. Picked up her pen. Jotted a note in the margin. Circled the time. 2:41 p.m. That was the moment it shifted. Not when she spoke. Not when she responded. When she refused to flinch. Glancing around, most faces had returned to neutral masks. A few had changed. A junior senator from Oregon gave a quick nod. Respect, acknowledgement. It didn't matter. Approval wasn't the goal. She caught something in Vance. His posture, straight alert. No longer leaning back. Smug curve gone. Eyes unfocused, waiting. Realizing the floor beneath him had shifted. And it would run deep. Not for the moment itself, but for what it represented. Too long, people underestimated her. They assumed poise meant passivity. Control meant weakness. Crockett had learned the best way to win wasn't to shout. It was to build the argument so well that the other side walked into it. Her calm wouldn't last. Outside the hearing room, things were already spiraling. Just after 3 p.m., the clip hit X. A 46-second silence, then a single question. That's all it took. But that was the brilliance of it. No shouting, no chaos, no drama, just precision. Someone at a local NBC affiliate clipped the moment straight from C-SPAN. No editing, no commentary, no music. Just Jasmine Crockett's voice, crystal clear. Is that the transparency you campaigned on, Senator? The video exploded. 40,000 views in under an hour. Then 200,000. Then 500,000. Like dry leaves catching fire. Curtis leaned over, showing her the screen. She blinked at the numbers. "Let it breathe," she said, closing her binder slowly. "Don't respond. Don't quote it. Don't share it. Just let it sit." He nodded. Let the country talk first. Back in the chamber, the hearing trudged on. A senator from Wyoming read a 5-minute statement on procurement fraud. Another asked about state audits. But no one was listening. Not really. The energy had shifted, not just inside the room, everywhere. In a Toledo high school, a civics teacher paused class, replayed the clip, and explained what had happened. In a Sacramento cafe, a barista watched it 3 times during a break. In a Tampa newsroom, a producer pitched a segment. Black Congresswoman holds her ground without yelling. It wasn't just viral. It was relevant. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance stayed silent. Arms crossed. Papers untouched. Avoiding eye contact. He tried neutrality, but the stiffness in his jaw, the rigidity in his posture betrayed him. This wasn't the clip he wanted circulating. He had tried to push her out cleanly, quietly. She had returned it, without raising her voice. Worse, she cited a precedent he probably hadn't read. No spin could soften this. Millions were watching raw. The chairwoman adjourned early. "Long day," she said. The hearing had hours left. But the energy was gone. Headlines were already writing themselves. Jasmine gathered her notes. A few reporters approached. She waved them off. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll talk tomorrow." Curtis followed to the elevator, phone buzzing every few seconds. "We're getting calls. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. Your front page on 3 digital papers already." She stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the parking level, eyes on Curtis. "I didn't say anything wild," she said. "I quoted a ruling exactly," he replied. "That's why it's hitting." She didn't smile. She looked tired, but sharp, focused. Attention wasn't the victory. Never was. Moments like these came and went. The press would move on. Hashtags would die down. What mattered was what she did next. What she did with the mic after it landed in her lap. As the elevator doors opened, her phone vibrated again. A name she hadn't seen in a while. Senator Arlene Boone. 40 years in the Senate, known for rarely praising anyone, even privately. The message was short. That was good. It meant something. Still, Jasmine didn't reply. She slid into the back seat, took off her heels, finally exhaled. Not deeply, not fully, but enough to feel her shoulders release. For the first time in a long time, she hadn't just survived an attack. She'd owned the moment. But the silence after a viral hit never lasts. Some weren't celebrating. J.D. Vance sat in his office, still in the same suit, tie slightly loosened, sleeves rolled halfway. Fluorescent lights washed his skin in a way cameras don't catch, but real people notice. He hadn't spoken since the ride back. 2 aides hovered near the door, pretending to scroll. No one wanted to be first. Pull the footage, Vance muttered finally, low, tired. We have it, one aide replied. 6 versions from different angles. TikTok. Some with captions. Vance winced. The aide nodded. Some captions sarcastic. 1. When the teacher knows the rules better than the principal. The screen lit up. The clip played again. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, calm, precise. The sentence everyone had already heard. Is that the transparency you campaigned on, Senator? Clean. Unbothered. Perfect timing. Perfect tone. That precision only someone with nothing to hide has. Vance's expression hardened. She set that up, he said, pointing at the screen. Planned. You don't pull that unless you knew it was coming. Brent, his communications director, cleared his throat. We flagged her prep last month. She's been studying old committee tapes, even ones most members don't watch. She's thorough. Ambushed you. She made me look like a bully, Vance said, standing. She didn't make you, Brent replied, careful. You interrupted her mid-sentence, sir. A sharp glare. She knew the rule book better than we did, Vance said, still processing. That's dangerous. Brent didn't respond. Meanwhile, across the Capitol, Jasmine sat in her office. Shoes off, still composed. Sipping lukewarm coffee, she didn't watch the numbers climb. She already knew what was happening out there. Curtis walked in, legal pad in hand. 3 interview requests. The Root wants a full profile. Someone from the Boston Globe wants to shadow you next week. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. They didn't care last year when I introduced the audit transparency bill. They care now, she said, looking down. Tapped her pen on the pad. I don't want sound bites. This isn't about one sentence. Curtis hesitated, kind of as though. That sentence, clean, quiet. That's why it hit. They'll try to poke at it, he added. Say it was rehearsed or for the cameras. She smirked. Wouldn't matter if I did. What matters is that I meant it. Curtis nodded, then dropped a printed transcript of the hearing on her desk. Formatted. Time-stamped. Just in case you want to post the full exchange yourself before anyone clips it wrong. She appreciated that he was quick. Reliable. She flipped through it, pausing at the exact timestamp that changed the tone of the day. 2:41 p.m. Still there. Still hers. Her phone buzzed again. Not a network. Not a journalist. Someone unexpected. Shelby Warner, a conservative moderate from Kansas who rarely spoke up. She'd once told Jasmine at a bipartisan dinner, I stay out of the fights. Safer that way. Now, she was texting, what you did today, that wasn't just smart. It was surgical. Thank you for holding your ground. Jasmine stared at the message. For a second, it wasn't about loyalty, not ideology. It was about recognition. Even across the aisle, people saw when someone held the line with truth, not volume. That moment hadn't just silenced a room. It exposed who actually did their homework. But not everyone saw it that way. Some were already plotting spin, narrative back in their favor. By early evening, her office barely stayed closed. Calls flooded in. Not just the usual. Press, donors, local reporters, real people. Nurses from Tulsa. A retired professor from Santa Fe. a college junior from Des Moines who'd never watched a hearing before, but felt seen for the first time. Curtis managed the flow. Door shut. Jasmine stayed at her desk. Calm. Controlled. She didn't need social media to validate what she already knew. When you speak with substance, you don't have to shout. Down the hall, colleagues peeked in. Quiet nods. Whispered thanks. Nothing public. Nothing on record. But she noticed. Even the ones who usually ignored her were watching now. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance's office stayed dark. No press statements. No tweets. A single short comment from a staffer. The senator stands by his interpretation of procedural rules. It barely slowed the wave. Commentators across the spectrum were weighing in. A former White House communications director tweeted, "Crockett handed Vance a live civics lesson. He failed the quiz." Another called it, "the cleanest takedown on the Hill this year." By 6 p.m., one of the biggest education YouTubers, a woman breaking down legal events for high schoolers, posted an explainer. "What Jasmine Crockett just taught us about power." 800,000 views before midnight. Curtis popped in again, tablet in hand. "You're in every major news cycle." NPR ran it. Even the Daily Caller reposted the clip. "Snarky," she read aloud. Congresswoman Crockett silences J.D. Vance with law school lecture voice. She gave a small half-smile. That was the best they could do. Facts couldn't be discredited, so they poked at tone. Jasmine leaned back. "Let them. You don't win by sounding aggressive. You win by being undeniable." She hadn't humiliated Vance. That would have looked petty. She had outmaneuvered him in full view, armed only with a 3-ring binder and a memory sharp enough to cut through spin. No applause needed. Respect earned. Curtis looked uneasy, watching her. He hesitated. Pushback starting. Not the press. From his people. Opposition research looks like it. Some of Vance's aides digging. Trying to build a timeline. Make it look like you orchestrated this. A media setup. Jasmine exhaled slowly. "So they're scared?" Curtis nodded. "They're calling it intentional optics manipulation. Because you read the rule book. They say your team baited him." She raised her eyebrows. "Are they wrong?" Curtis grinned. "Not entirely." She leaned forward. "Let them talk. Let them scream. People aren't mad it landed. They're mad I didn't flinch." Footsteps echoed outside. Reporters gathered near the elevators. She ignored them. Focus wasn't on today. It was on tomorrow. This wasn't about going viral. It was about credibility. About making it harder for the next person to get blindsided. And she knew exactly how to keep pressure where it mattered. She pulled a notepad close and began jotting headlines. Not reactive ones. Proactive. Topics that mattered. "Issues buried under scandal and noise, Curtis," she said. "Start scheduling local press. I want regional outlets, public radio, school papers." He blinked. "School papers. Especially school papers," she clarified. "The ones who watch that clip today. They're the ones voting in 6 years." While she stayed grounded, others weren't ready to move on. And the flashbacks started creeping in. The first time Jasmine Crockett spoke at a hearing, her voice shook. Not fear. It was adrenaline. The kind that rushes in when your body knows something your mind hasn't admitted yet. That you are being watched, judged, measured. All at once. That hearing was in Baton Rouge. A town hall packed into a courthouse basement. Standing room only. Hot air crawling through the vents. She was just a state representative back then. The topic? Mundane. A utility contract gone wrong. But she had uncovered something. A backroom deal that padded profits for a third-party broker. Nothing illegal, but enough to stink. She stood up and named the broker. One of the city councilmen rolled his eyes and muttered into his mic. "That's cute." It stung. Not because she hadn't expected it, but because it worked. The room chuckled. She looked young. She looked alone. But she kept going. That night, she didn't sleep. She went over every second of her testimony, trying to pinpoint the mistake. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't gotten emotional. So why had her presence been so easy to dismiss? The answer didn't come immediately. It took a year of watching others. How men, especially white men, could raise their voice and be called passionate. How women had to preface facts with soft language just to avoid sounding aggressive. She started experimenting, adjusted her pace, lowered her pitch slightly, practiced speaking in courtrooms with a single raised eyebrow instead of full gestures. Not acting. It was about control, precision. Language mattered, but so did delivery. By the time she got to D.C., Jasmine was fluent in 2 dialects, the language of truth and the language of power. Still, there had been stumbles. Her first month in Congress, she introduced a transparency bill tied to infrastructure contracts. Airtight, budget-backed, endorsed by 2 policy think tanks. But when she presented it to the committee, one senator interrupted before she hit her second point. I think you're conflating the scope of local versus federal jurisdiction, Congresswoman. She wasn't. Not even close. But the room nodded with him. He knew the game. Didn't need to be right. Just confident. Confusion was a tool when used against someone underestimated. That night, she wrote something in her notebook she would look at before every hearing. Be unshakable. Be undeniable. Let them bury themselves. It wasn't a slogan. It was survival. Now, sitting in her D.C. office, feet tucked under her chair, hair down for the day, she looked at that same notebook. She turned the page. Another quote, this one from her grandmother. They'll stop swinging when they hit steel. That's what happened today. Vance swung. He expected the usual pushback. A raised voice, a defiant rant, something loud he could twist into disorder. Instead, he hit steel. Quiet steel. The kind that doesn't bend or break. The kind that forces you to look at yourself. Jasmine got up and walked to the window. The Capitol dome stood in the distance, glowing in the soft dusk. It always looked romantic from far away. Like the system inside. It wasn't messy. It wasn't corrupt. It wasn't bloated. But she knew better. And still she fought for it. Not because the system was noble, but because people deserved better than the ones who treated it like a game. Behind her, Curtis organized clips for the morning press briefing. Didn't speak. Just clicked, dragged files, time-stamped quotes, cleaned raw audio. She let him work. She needed this moment alone. Because the attention wouldn't last. The praise would fade. And the next fight would come sooner than anyone expected. Right now, though, just for this breath, she allowed herself something she rarely did. Pride. Not flashy pride. Not the one you post about. The quiet kind. The kind that settles in your chest. The kind that comes when you know you stood your ground. Not for a headline, not for a clapback, but for the people watching. The ones who've been silenced their whole lives. While she found peace in her past, Vance's team was already scrambling to rewrite the future. What they pulled next would try to tilt the story by sunrise. J.D. Vance's communications team was deep in crisis mode. His chief of staff, Lorna DeWitt, was not a morning person, but she'd been at her desk since 5 a.m. coffee untouched. Hair still damp from a rushed shower. The tone had shifted overnight. What began as a brief embarrassment had become a full-fledged narrative problem. Narratives, once locked in, were near impossible to kill. They had expected a clip, maybe a few think pieces. They hadn't expected bipartisan applause. The worst part? No one had doctored anything. Jasmine's moment played exactly as it happened. No aggressive edits. No dramatic music. No misleading voiceovers. Just clean footage of her dismantling his argument with calm precision. That makes it harder to counter, Lorna said. So what do we have? Brent, the comms director, looked miserable. We tried pushing the angle that she staged it, that her aide had a script prepared. It didn't land. Why? Because it makes her look competent. Ready. People respect it. Lorna paused. Did we get traction on the idea she violated decorum? No, Brent said. Actually, it backfired. Legal scholars on both sides are saying she stayed within her rights. She threw her pen down. So we're the ones who look unprepared. Nobody answered. That afternoon, Vance agreed to a brief sit-down with a conservative-leaning podcast out of Arizona. Safe ground. Friendly host. The goal: frame the incident as a misunderstanding, a technical foul, not an attack. It didn't go well. The host lobbed him a softball. Were you just trying to keep order in a chaotic hearing? Vance nodded. Of course. There are rules, and we were simply trying to maintain those. Congresswoman Crockett has a reputation for speaking forcefully. I tried to redirect. The host pushed slightly, but she quoted a precedent from 2021 that contradicts your objection, right? He tried to smile. I haven't reviewed that transcript fully. My team is looking into it. That one line triggered a wave of new headlines. Vance admits he didn't know the rule. Senator fumbled attempt to silence Crockett, then blamed the clock. My team is looking into it. The non-apology was heard around the Hill. Even conservative columnists began writing op-eds defending Crockett. One from the Arizona Sentinel said plainly, "You don't have to agree with her politics to admit she played the moment right. That's what accountability looks like." Meanwhile, Jasmine remained quiet. Her team issued a short statement reaffirming her commitment to transparency, facts, and open dialogue in committee hearings. No digs, no hashtags, no spin. And that drove Vance's people nuts, because silence from her camp meant all the noise was coming from theirs. Then came the leak. An anonymous source within Vance's office shared an internal email chain. Not damning, but revealing. It showed that his senior advisor had warned him ahead of the hearing. Crockett may reference the 2021 clause decision. Don't challenge her without confirmation. He ignored it. The leak didn't come from Jasmine's team. They were just as surprised, but it landed like a hammer. The next morning, national media ran. Vance was warned, ignored staff advice before challenging Crockett. Back in Jasmine's office, Curtis stood in the doorway, phone in hand. "Wanna read it?" She looked up from her laptop. "I already know what it says." He waited, then added, "Even folks at Politico are saying you may have just shifted the power dynamic on the Oversight Committee." Jasmine smiled a little. "That's not what I was trying to do." "I know," Curtis said, "but that's probably why it worked." She nodded, more to herself than him. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, she'd watched men fumble talking points and still get the benefit of the doubt. She'd watched colleagues bend rules and call it strategy. But the moment she stayed calm under fire, they scrambled to spin it like a trap. Let them. She wasn't here for theater. She was here for policy, for integrity, for people who'd never be invited to testify, but lived with the consequences of everything this chamber voted on. Even as headlines swirled and narratives twisted, something deeper was happening. A shift no spin doctor could fully control. It started with a hallway conversation, quiet, unplanned. Senator Eleanor Hatch, 72, from Vermont, stopped Jasmine outside the elevator after a late-night session. Hatch was old school, a moderate with deep roots, and an encyclopedic memory of Senate hearings dating back to Watergate. She placed a hand lightly on Jasmine's arm. "You know," she said, "that was something we tried to do for years, make silence speak louder than anger. Most of us gave up trying." Jasmine blinked. "You think I was silent?" "I think you were measured," Hatch said, "and that scares them more than anything else." Then she walked away. No follow-up, no camera nearby. Just one veteran passing a torch she never thought she'd see lit again. The next day, Jasmine arrived at her office early, before staff, before press. She needed quiet, not for strategy, but to think. The moment had passed. The clip had circulated, dissected, turned into memes, remixed with music, analyzed on podcasts. But the moment itself was never what mattered. What came after mattered. A handful of Republicans, not the loud ones, but the policy wonks, the workhorses, had started stopping her in the hallway, asking about language in her bills, asking to understand her logic. Nothing public, nothing they'd be quoted on. But something had shifted. They weren't writing her off anymore. Even if they disagreed with her, they'd seen her do something few in that building managed. She held power without feeding it. She used facts to disarm ego. And she didn't apologize for being right. Back home, her district office in Texas was flooded with mail. Real mail. Handwritten letters from teachers, bus drivers, retired veterans. Curtis had to call in an extra pair of hands just to sort through the envelopes. One stood out. From a woman named Lorraine Shields in Marfa, Texas. 78 years old, widowed. "My late husband always told me," she wrote, "never raise your voice in a room full of men who doubt you. Make them strain to hear you, and they'll listen harder. That's what you did, Miss Crockett. I just wanted to say thank you." Jasmine kept that one in her bag. Meanwhile, Vance's office was still reeling. The leak, the internal memo warning him not to challenge Crockett without verifying precedent, had triggered an internal investigation. Staffers were on edge. One aide quit. Another went on personal leave. Reporters weren't letting it go. The problem wasn't just the mistake. It was how he handled it. He hadn't admitted he was wrong. He hadn't owned it. Jasmine Crockett. Quiet power. Issues buried under scandal and noise, Curtis. She said, "Start scheduling local press. I want regional outlets, public radio, school papers," she added. He blinked. "School papers? Especially school papers," she said. "The ones who watch that clip today. They're the ones voting in 6 years." While she stayed grounded, others weren't ready to move on. The flashback of where she'd come from was creeping back. The first time Jasmine Crockett spoke at a hearing, her voice had shaken. Not fear, but adrenaline. The kind that rushes in when your body knows something your mind hasn't yet admitted. You are being watched, judged, and measured all at once. The hearing was in Baton Rouge, a town hall packed into a courthouse basement, hot air crawling through the vents. She was just a state rep back then, the topic mundane. A utility contract gone wrong, but she'd uncovered a backroom deal that padded profits for a third-party broker. Nothing illegal, but enough to stink. She stood up and named the broker. One city councilman rolled his eyes and muttered, "That's cute." It stung, not because she didn't expect it, but because it worked. The room chuckled. She looked young, alone, but she kept going. That night, she didn't sleep, reviewing every second of her testimony. She hadn't yelled, hadn't gotten emotional. So why had her presence been so easy to dismiss? The answer came slowly. A year of watching how others did it, how men, especially white men, could raise their voice and be called passionate, while women had to preface facts with soft language just to avoid sounding aggressive. She started experimenting, adjusting pace, lowering pitch, practicing courtroom delivery with a single raised eyebrow instead of full gestures. Not acting, but mastering control and precision. Language mattered. Delivery mattered. By the time she got to D.C., Jasmine was fluent in 2 dialects, truth and power. Still, there had been stumbles. Her first month in Congress, she introduced a transparency bill tied to infrastructure contracts. Airtight, budget-backed, endorsed by 2 policy think tanks. When she presented it, One senator interrupted before she hit her second point. "I think you're conflating local and federal jurisdiction, Congresswoman." She wasn't, not even close. But the room nodded with him. Confidence, not correctness, was a powerful tool against those underestimated. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "Be unshakable. Be undeniable. Let them bury themselves." Years later, sitting in her D.C. office, she looked at that same notebook. The next page held a quote from her grandmother. "They'll stop swinging when they hit steel." That day, Vance swung. He expected loud, defiant resistance, something he could twist into disorder. Instead, he hit steel. The quiet kind that doesn't bend or break, the kind that forces reflection. Jasmine stood at the window, Capitol Dome glowing at dusk, and allowed herself a rare moment of quiet pride. Not the flashy kind, the chest-deep kind, for standing her ground for the people who had been silenced. Meanwhile, Vance's team scrambled. Clips were time-stamped, quotes cleaned up. They tried to spin it, claim she staged it, scripted it, but nothing stuck. Clean footage, calm precision, bipartisan applause. The very act that should have been unremarkable became unassailable. Lorna, his chief of staff, muttered, "Did we get traction on decorum?" "No. Legal scholars say she stayed within her rights," Brent admitted. Vance tried a friendly conservative podcast, softball questions, safe ground. But when asked about a 2021 precedent, he fumbled. Headlines blared. Vance admits he didn't know the rule. Even conservative columnists praised Crockett. Jasmine stayed quiet. Her team issued a simple statement about transparency, facts, and open dialogue. No digs, no hashtags, no spin. Silence became power. Then came the leak. An internal email from Vance's office warning him not to challenge her. He ignored it. National media ran the story. Curtis held the phone in her doorway. "Even Politico says you may have shifted the oversight committee power dynamic." Jasmine smiled faintly. "Not what I was trying to do. Probably why it worked," Curtis said. "It did." Years of watching men fumble, bend rules, and get credit had taught her the lesson. Calm, precise preparation beats theatrics. Facts disarm ego. And you don't apologize for being right. A hallway conversation with Senator Eleanor Hatch, 72, a Watergate-era veteran, confirmed it. "That was something we tried to do for years. Make silence speak louder than anger," Hatch said. "Most gave up. I think you were measured. That scares them." The next morning back home, her office was flooded with letters. Handwritten notes from teachers, bus drivers, veterans. One from Lorraine Shields, 78, in Marfa, Texas. "My late husband always said, never raise your voice where men doubt you. Make them strain to hear you. They'll listen harder. That's what you did, Miss Crockett." "Thank you." Vance's office reeled. Investigations, staff resignations, reporter pressure. The mistake wasn't just procedural. It was the optics. He hadn't admitted he was wrong. He tried to downplay, shift blame. Jasmine didn't comment publicly, but behind closed doors, her team prepared for bigger battles. Curtis suggested reintroducing the transparency bill. She repeated, "They're watching." She flipped through her worn binder. The same from the hearing. Still strong. Stronger now, because people believed she could carry it. No press release. Let them reach out first. If it's real, they will. Later, alone in the hallway outside the chamber, passing portraits of legislators she'd studied but never admired, she felt the moment. Her name was now in those rooms, not as a disruptor, not as a headline, but as someone who stayed grounded when challenged. They weren't just watching, they were listening. Then the final call came. Washington area code. She nearly let it go to voicemail. Instinct told her to pick up. "Congresswoman Crockett," J.D. Vance said. "I didn't expect that moment to go the way it did. I was wrong. Not just procedure, but I underestimated how thoroughly you came prepared. She stayed silent, letting him finish. You tried to pull the mic away, she said softly. I just didn't let go, he admitted. Fair enough, she said. You didn't expect me to stay calm. No, he said. Then, unexpectedly. Years ago, I watched my mom get talked over at every town hall. She stopped going. No one wanted to hear women, unless they were quiet enough to ignore. I would have liked what you did. Jasmine paused. You can still choose to listen now. If you move the transparency bill again, I might actually read it this time. The line went dead. No promises, no alliances. But a bridge fragile had shifted. The next morning, Jasmine spoke softly into a local affiliate mic oversight reform. Policy. Facts. No mention of Vance. No viral moment. The story told itself. Later, passing interns by the reflecting pool, she said, You don't have to speak loud. Just make sure when you do, they can't ignore what you said. Quiet, precise, unshakable. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a political spat. She showed the country and the women watching that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, then strikes, calmly, precisely, leaving no room for denial.